Hey guys, welcome back. So let's head back to our RPG controller, and as you can see here, I just added some comments so that we can understand what these functions do when we revisit this project in the future. So if you want, you can pause the video right here and copy the comments or create your own. Now, something to remember is if we select this little settings icon, we can select show access specifier in my blueprint view. And as you can see, all of these functions right now are public, but we don't want this to be accessible anywhere outside of this controller, so we can just select them and change the access specifier to be private. And we can do the same with these other two functions. Now I will place each of them in a category called private. We can just drag this one and this one as well. Compile and save. So with this done, let's set up our camera, because currently we can look around and stuff, but it's rather stiff. So with this looking like that and feeling like that, we're going to add a camera and spring arm to our player character. But first, let's open up our master character and let's set the meshes transform a bit. So I'm going to select the mesh and change the rotation to be -90. And let's close this and head to the player character. Open full blueprint editor, head to the viewport, and we'll need to specify a mesh, which we will do very soon. But for now, let's add a spring arm. And you might be asking, why didn't I just add a spring arm to my master character? And that's because we don't want the AI to have a camera, So with the spring arm here, we can just attach this to our capsule component and then add a camera. And we'll add a mesh to the camera later, but for now, let's select the spring arm and set the target arm length to be 0. And let's see here. All right, so with this done, and our spring arm is set to 0, target arm length is 0, all we need to do is reset the rotation so that it faces our arrow's forward direction. Right? With this done, we can set the height manually for now. So let's do 70. If you want your character to be a bit taller, you can do something like 80 or 90 for a complete height. I guess I can do 90. Yeah. And we're going to select use pawn control rotation. You can see the description of this. If this is false, by the way, and you hit play, you can see we cannot look up or down, only left and right. So we need this to be true. And if you see that things are a bit slow within the editor, it's because I'm trying to record this tutorial in the highest possible quality so that you can feel a bit more comfortable when looking at this course. So now with this set to true and the camera selected, we can set the parent socket to be the spring arm's endpoint. And we can select our spring arm again and scroll down. And we're going to enable camera lag and camera rotation lag. We're going to set both of these values to be 20 and the max lag distance to be something like 150 to ensure that it doesn't get too far lagged behind. Now if I hit play again, the looking input is a lot more smooth, right? And the rotation is smooth as well, and you can test out the camera's lag in a bit. Now, we'll need to add our crouching input and jumping. So we can double click on one of our input actions within our RPG controller and then hit this little browse icon so we can browse to the folder easily. And I'm going to right click and head to input and select a new input action. And this will be for our jump. And I'm going to duplicate this, and this will be for our crouching. We don't need to change anything within the input actions themselves, but we will need to add them to our input mapping context. So I'm going to add our jump first, and the key would be spacebar. I'm going to add our crouch, and the key for this one would be our C key. I'm just going to collapse all of this and save. Now back into the BP RPG controller, we can search for our input actions, and I'm going to select crouch and jump. For jumping, it's rather simple actually, and since the getControlledPawn function returns of type pawn object reference, you cannot get the jump function. This is only accessible with a target of type character. So we can use getPlayerCharacter and call the jump function. And we don't need this to be triggered constantly, so we can just call this off of started. So when we press it, it triggers, and when we release the key, then we want to stop jumping. Now by default within the engine, as long as the character movement mode returns to walking, then by default it obviously means he's not falling anymore, therefore it means he's not jumping. But we can just plug this in for now, and later when we add more functionality to this, we can expand on this and make this a bit better. Right now, if I hit play again, I can jump just like that. And if you want to specify things like our jump height and velocity, all you need to do is select the player character, head to the character movement component, and right here you can see the jump Z velocity, and this is how high you would be jumping. You have access to your air control, braking, deceleration, falling, and all of that good stuff. So for now, we can just leave this as default, because jumping is not going to be a huge part in this course. Now, for crouching, since only the player character will be crouching, we'll do this in the RPG controller, and I'll call this function perform crouch action. So the first thing we'll need is access to the character movement component. Now we could get this from the master character, which I recommend you do. Basically, there's a number of ways to do this to access a class, and you can get them through casting by using the cast to master character. But this is rather expensive on, optimization and stuff. So it's rather expensive on your game. You can use interfaces, which is a lot less expensive, but it's still not the most efficient way. The best and most efficient way is by simply storing a reference to the master character once and then accessing that later throughout all of your classes. But since this is meant to be a modular and very easily extendable project, then interfaces is the best option. So we're going to head to core files and add a new folder for our interfaces. In here, I want to right click and head to Blueprint and select Blueprint Interface. I'm going to call this BPI core files. So I'm going to create a first function and let's access the character movement component. I'm going to copy the character movement text and add an output of type character movement component, and I'm going to rename this to be return value. Next, we might want to access the character itself later, but for now we can just leave this core files interface here, and we can use this interface in multiple classes to access different variables, functions, or components. So back in the master character, so let's select this editor icon, and this will open up the master character, and we'll implement this interface in our class settings under interfaces. So let's select BPI core files. Let's open this up and just drag in the character movement component. So while we're here, let's add stuff to access all of our classes, because we will need to access our controller and our HUD class. So within the BPI core files, let's add another function, and we're going to keep the names consistent. So access RPG controller and access RPG HUD. Both of these need outputs of type similar classes. So let's get the RPG HUD for this one. And for the controller, let's get the RPG controller return value. Alright, so this is set. All we need to do is copy the return value output text and paste it in for the rest of them. So there's a few ways of doing this. We can head back to our controller and just search for access RPG controller, and then it will require a target. And since we're already here, we can get a reference to self, and it would work. But I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that we can just search for get RPG controller, and then we can get it and use it without having to specify a target or anything like that. And we can do this by setting everything up within a library. And since libraries call functions globally, we can then use that in any class moving forward. So in core files, I'll add a new folder for our function library. I'm going to select blueprints and select blueprint function library. I'm going to call this BFL underscore RBG system. In here, the first function that I want to create is get RPG controller. Off of the get RPG controller, I want to call access RPG controller and drag the return value into the input of the function to create an output node. Connect this right here. What is recommended is you do an isValid check, so that you can understand where your code breaks when the time comes. So if it is valid, then we'll return. And if it's not, then we can just add in print string. And this prints, I'm going to just give it a nice red color. So I'm going to do 1, 0, and 0. And I'll say RPG controller not valid. For the controller class, we can just get player controller, and just in case you may not want to always access the player controller itself, we can add a target of type object reference, and if it's valid, then we don't need to access this. If it's not valid, then we could just use this. That's an option, but it's not necessary. So we can just drag this in right now, and I'll duplicate this function, and let's get our RPG HUD. Delete this, and from the player controller, we'll need to access the HUD function. So let's get HUD, and this is the HUD class that's currently being used by this player controller. So from here, we can access the RPG HUD, connect this right here, connect the return value to your isValid pin. And for the return value, I'm going to delete this parameter and drag in this new one. And off of the isNotValid, I'm just going to rename this to be RPG HUD not valid. Okay. So we did that. We can now access the master character, or we can call access character movement. It's up to you. What I would do for this one is, let me think. I guess we can just access the master character. Let's get the character movement component. So let's get character movement. I'm going to call access character movement, and we will be using this exact same interface later when we are creating our animation blueprint. I'm going to copy this and paste it in. And since this is in our master character, then all we'll need to do is get the player character as the target. Connect this, delete the output parameter, reconnect it, and this is character movement not valid. Okay, so we can close this library, head back to our RPG controller, and we can now search for get character movement, and you can see under the BFL RPG system we can get the function. So we don't need this to be an executable function, so we can just make this pure as well as the others. So if crouching input is received, then we want to crouch. But we will set this up in the next episode. I believe that this episode has gone on a bit too long. So see you in the next one, guys. Bye.